these recent news reports about these balloons, and there was a lot of, it seemed like, fear mongering about, oh, maybe they're UFOs of the type that you research with aliens. And I think it scared a lot of people, don't you?
I do, and you've got American aircraft taking down objects that they say they don't know what they are. That could get costly. Another thing, too, is they're using the term UFO. And here, the past 4 or 5 years, we've been hammered with the name change of objects that are being seen and recorded and researched by the US government as UAPs. But here they switch back to UFOs. So that was interesting to capture that in the conversations also. Another part that was makes you want to, raise that little red flag of this doesn't make sense. Red flags of ufology, I call them, is the FBI had tracked these things coming across and not alerted the White House. So that kind of makes you wonder, well, who's in charge here?
Mm-hmm.
At what point do you wake up the president and say, hey, we got something unidentified over our airspace? Who makes that call? And if you don't know what it is, you just decide to shoot it down and you still haven't told him. This is a lot of interesting things here. So a lot of fear being pushed out the door here. I see a lot of that. They're pushing the whole idea of defensive airspace. That our aircraft could be in danger of these things being up there. That right there, I can see what's happening is they want to get our support to okay that's going on, that they're doing these takedown activities to protect us. I don't know if that's a good thing. There's a lot of craziness going on with this whole last couple of weeks. Believe me, I've been watching it real close. I don't think we're looking at anything like we saw before with the Navy off of San Diego and the ships that were recording the UAPs. I don't see that type of activity being part of this. So I don't know what this is about. I don't know why they're pushing it so hard, but it's definitely interesting to watch.
The papers I found on my desk was a document entitled Operation Majority, and it was not the entire paperwork involving this operation, but was merely a synopsis of the operation and projects contained under it. One of these projects was called Project Red Light. The purpose, according to this document, was to back-engineer captured extraterrestrial technology for adaptation into the United States space program. Now, I have since come to believe that the extraterrestrial portion of all of this is nonsense, but that the technology is real. I believe that many of us were shown these documents over the years so that later we would talk about it. I mean, how can you keep the existence of extraterrestrials, if they were real, a secret? And how could anyone keep quiet knowing that they had seen documentation, official government documents labeled top secret, that expressed that these extraterrestrials were real and had visited this earth? I wanted to know just how true all of this was, and I began a program of research to find out if extraterrestrials were real. The first thing I did was collect every bit of documentation that I could find, both from the Freedom of Information Act, from the research of others, from books that had been printed on the subject of UFOs, and of course through my network of friends in the intelligence community. What I discovered was amazing. What I discovered, ladies and gentlemen, is that there has been a plan in existence since about 1917, and probably before that, to create an artificial extraterrestrial threat to this earth in order to create a one-world totalitarian socialist government. One of the first documents that I found in my search was this one. The Imperial Japanese Mission 1917, a record of the reception throughout the United States of the special mission headed by Viscount Ishii. And when the Imperial Japanese Mission was in New York City, they had a dinner, and some pretty famous people spoke at this dinner. One of them was John Dewey. John Dewey is the father of our failing, disastrous public education system. Here's what he said. Listen very carefully. John Dewey, professor of philosophy in Columbia University, who was the next speaker, was listened to with great intentness. He said, quote, "Someone remarked that the best way to unite all the nations on this globe would be an attack from some other planet."
It really is. And some people are saying that it's made purposefully as a distraction. Do you think that's a possibility? Yeah.
It's a possibility. It's an expensive one.
Yes.
If whatever they're shooting at and say that they're bringing down, they're using, very expensive missiles to do that with. These Sidewinders or whatever type you're using on these aircraft, they're not cheap by any means. So,
yeah, I've seen reports that it's just hundreds of thousands of dollars going into this, and that's taxpayer money. So this brings me to wonder about something that I've been seeing, Project Bluebeam, which, as my understanding, this is a U.S. military intelligence project that's using holographic technology to project things that look physical in the sky. And they've already used them for pilots who were unaware of this to test out how they would react to this. What is Project Bluebeam, and what's going on there?
Yeah, that goes way back when I started into all this in the early 90s, actually. It came from a book where I think it was a Canadian journalist that wrote about it initially. And it was the idea that this was something that NASA had in planning that was, could be used in the future. The idea of holographic technology to make it even appear, if they wanted to, is to be the second coming. But it seems to me, after being in this for, close to 30 years now, in the research part of it, that it's just like, wow, are we still talking about that one? You'd think that the technology would even be way beyond that now, that they've got things that, who knows, that would make Bluebeam look like it was pretty primitive.
Makes sense that technology is always improving. The kind of idea behind it that we keep hearing is that it's something the government has in their pocket as a way of controlling the masses through fear.
Yeah, in a wartime situation, it could be used. Let's say they're dealing with more primitive countries, and they have a strong, spiritual belief background of some sort. They could even, I mentioned the second coming. Well, that's a Christian perspective of Jesus in his return, but making these apparitions, I should say, was what they're talking about, is making an apparition where these cultures would see their own, deity show up, and for confusion and control.
That is true, absolutely. But it just seems like a lot of false flags, a lot of things that the government comes up with, schemes. I want to just say schemes as a way of controlling us through fear. Let's go back to when on the radio many years ago, there was a supposed alien invasion and people thought it was real. They freaked out. They got very, very afraid. And so if the government did that visually now and made it very realistic, they could have the populace begging for another lockdown, or they could have people begging.
That and the other aspects of control in areas of society, like during lockdowns. I guess there's been not just these unidentifieds being seen over our airspace and Canadian airspace, but in the reports that came out these past couple of weeks, there have been some over in Europe too.
Yes, indeed. The mainstream news, I was really surprised, was on board with reporting that these balloons were UFOs. And they weren't going so far as saying outer spacecraft, but they were kind of hinting on that. And that's something that you wouldn't have heard 10 years ago.
No, they're keeping the idea of the whole UFO UAP going. But, you know, like I said, when the terminology changed back to UFO, I thought, what happened here? Why are we saying that? Well, they're saying it for a purpose, is they want to keep the UFO idea going, the UAP ID going. But these were definitely not following the characteristics of what they're classifying now as UAPs. It's not behaving in the strangeness like the UAPs are. It's not, these objects weren't traveling at speeds that were incredible and making right-hand turns. And, you know, they weren't going submersible in an instant. You know, they weren't doing those things. So that kept them in the UFO group, not the UAP group. But they're still keeping the subject going by it. Yeah. And I think it's interesting that, you know, they were able to tag up on that and use this whole thing. But I think when it comes down to it, they've got to have an answer for what they're doing here. They just can't keep shooting things down and saying, well, we don't know what it is, you know, and just leaving the door open as we're not ruling out the possibility of extraterrestrial, you know, which, you know, it's just stretching us out even farther for disclosure, which I don't think is ever going to happen. For them to really pull off a believable apparition to a modern society, I don't think they got the technology. Because to pull off that type of holographic image, man, everything's got to be in the right place. I mean, you've got to have atmospheric conditions that have got to be right. Something has to be able to bounce around to, you know, to make it work. And I just don't think that that's something. I think that was sci-fi. You know, it's something they were looking at. I think you can take and pull it off with a primitive society, maybe that's never seen, you know, the aspects of television, more or less, and see something appear in the sky in front of them. But you're not going to pull it off to the American people or Europeans or Australians. That we're seeing things that are way beyond that.
Interesting.
So this stuff that we're seeing now, it, you know, isn't even comprehensible in sci-fi matters, you know, if you really think about it.
So Joe, what are these balloons, these objects that are being seen?
I've heard it thrown out there that it could be just stuff that some private industry is doing, testing and stuff like that. That's why I say somebody's going to be real mad. Yeah. You know, or somebody is real mad.
Someone's investment.
Yeah.
You what, mate?
Yep.